Why, hello there, and welcome back to the tavern, where we have plenty of fun games and beverages which taste a lot like the sweet taste of victory, which I imagine what Lee was thinking as he took down PNC in our first kickoff match here at BlizzCon 2019, where we're having the Hearthstone Grandmaster Global Finals. But that's just the beginning. This is just the start, as we have another epic Group A bracket match that's about to get started. So without further ado, let's meet players number 3 and 4 and find out who Lee is playing in the winners final, shall we? The first player, hailing from South Korea, he is the winner of Asia Pacific Season 1, the 2017 Top 4 in the World Championship. Please welcome from SK Telecom, Surrender! And their opponents, the winner of the devastatingly competitive European region from Team Complexity, the most top 16 appearances from anybody in the Hearthstone Championship Tour Source Stop. Please welcome Casie. Players, shake hands. And let's get this match underway.
Thank you so much, Dan. I am incredibly happy to be at BlizzCon hosting the Hearthstone Global Championship with reigning world champion, fierce competitor, and longtime friend, Hunter Ace.
How's it going, Gallum? I'm doing great. I'm so hyped for finally be able to cast a very big event, and this is an entirely new experience for me, and I guess for you also, because we're not usually casters. We are normally competitors in the Grandmasters, and I'm really excited for this experience, and I think that we have some really good competitors that we're gonna watch today.
It's not your first time on the big stage. Speaking of that, Surrender, this is going to be his second time at a global finals. Fierce competitor from the APAC region, considered by many to be the best, arguably with Tom 60229, playing against Casie, who you have a lot of experience playing against.
Yes, Casie is one of the most consistent players throughout all time in Europe. He recently, to qualify for the Grandmasters, actually beat me in the finals, which was a pretty rough defeat. But I think Casie is one of the players out there that deserve this the most. And I think that he's always been super close to making it and getting that big W, but he hasn't really quite gotten it yet. And I think that this is the big opportunity he has. And I have big expectations for him, and I hope he really does well. Yeah,
he has a lot of experience versus tough opponents, but I mean, Surrender is one of the toughest out there. Surrender got a top 4. He made it to the semifinals of the 2017 World Championship, where he lost to Tom 60229, but he displayed some immaculate gameplay, and I'm expecting the same from him now today.
Yes, Surrender is, in my opinion, probably my favorite APAC player of all time. I remember back in the days when Rosapris was big, I remember watching him play the big tournaments, Summer Championships and the World Championships, and it was so impressive to play, almost flawless gameplay. And I think that he's a player that really thrives whenever he's on the big stage. And I think it's going to be super difficult for his opponents to defeat him this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, and when we're talking about this match, I think it's going to be a tale of two very different play styles. Surrender is known for taking a long time on his turns, thinking through every single scenario. Meanwhile, Casie is one of the fastest players in the game right now. He will put on pressure turn after turn and not give his opponents a second to think.
Yes, and it's going to be interesting for sure. I think that what happens a lot of the time when Casie plays is that his opponents sometimes get lured into the fast playing, because every turn is so fast, and it makes them be able to think less, and sometimes they just get into the mood themselves, which they're not necessarily as comfortable as Casie with.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just ladder games and Hearthstone Grandmasters week to week. We're talking about BlizzCon here, folks. If you're under pressure here, there is nowhere to run to. You have to be on that stage playing to get your spot as the Hearthstone Global Champion.
Yes, and it's probably going to be a very new experience for a lot of the competitors. You never really know how it feels to be on this stage. You can sit there before being entirely calm and not nervous at all, and then when you're on the stage, suddenly it just hits you.
Well, let's take a look at Casey's Quest Shaman, which he had protected in the shield phase of Conquest. So he is running Quest Shaman. He has the new quest from Saviors of Old Doom, which says if you have 6 Battlecry minions played, you get to double your Battlecries with your hero power. Meanwhile, Surrender is going to be on Tempo Rogue, featuring Questing Adventure and Vendetta, which has found its way into a lot of these lists this weekend. The new Doom in the Tomb update introduced Swashbuckler back into Standard. Swashbuckler makes Vendetta much more consistent of a card, and just that entire Burgle Rogue package much more consistent.
Yeah, we see that both of these decks have been in the meta for quite some time now, I would say, but they both got very powerful additions with the Doom of the Tomb expansion that just hit. And both with Swashbuckler and the Evolve package, I think these decks are incredibly strong at the moment.
For sure. And I mean, even without Swashbuckler, Ferrocat is another card that is very powerful in Vendetta Burgle Rogue, because some of the time you actually end up with a class card off of Ferrocat. Speaking of which, like, even without a class card, this card is so powerful. A 1-mana 1/2, get a random reborn card into your hand. That's so much tempo and value this early in the game is fantastic.
Yes, it's really something that Rogue has been missing recently, which is a 1-drop or an early game play that Kid could do. There was a long time where Rogue just didn't have any 1-drops, and they were very reliant on doing very powerful combo turns later in the game. But now they're a lot more consistent with having both the Swashbuckler and the Cat.
Yeah. How do you feel about this matchup? Vendetta Rogue, Burgle Rogue versus Quest Shaman. Who do you think is favored?
I think that this matchup is pretty close. We see in this tournament that there's both the Quest Shaman version and the more token Shaman version without the Quest. And I think that the Quest Shaman is a bit slower and makes it a bit weaker in this matchup. It has less high roll potential, and I really think that versus the Rogue, you kind of need a very powerful turn to swing back on the board.
So what you're saying is the difference between Quest Shaman and Evolve Shaman is Evolve Shaman tries to fight for board as quickly as possible, meanwhile Quest Shaman takes its time. Giving time to Rogue is not a good idea.
Yeah, because Rogue kind of just powers through the turns, and eventually they hit you with a Waggle Pick into Leroy, and there's not much Quest Shaman can do at that point, because you don't really run into taunt minions.
We see even here right now that the Rogue has a wealth of options to play out, and that's not something that Rogue usually has in the early turns. If you followed Hearthstone, historically Rogue doesn't really do much in the early turns besides maybe a big Edwin. But just
yeah,
starting
and
off
we see that the Ferrocats are super key to this, with him both picking up the Mermaid to clean out the curve this turn, and the Candle Taker now for next turn.
This is just an absolutely fantastic start for Surrender. It is not something Casie wants to see. Now keep in mind, Casie does have a Mind Control tech in his hand, so if Surrender plays into that, there's a world where Casie goes Mind Control tech stealing something like a Candle Taker.
Yes, and something you always have to be aware of as a Rogue here is that the more minions you play on board, the scarier cards like Mogu Fleshaper becomes, which is a very powerful card in the new version of Shaman now, which gets cheaper for every single minion on the board. And pairing that together with Evolve or potentially Mutate is something that Rogue doesn't really have an answer to, except for if they have the Sap in hand.
Evolve and Mutate both transform Mogu Fleshaper into a minion that costs 1 more. It's currently a 7-mana minion, so it becomes 8-mana minion. It could evolve into Ragnaros or Octosari, both very powerful options among the wealth of 8-drops in Standard right now.
Yes, so we see Surrender here. Currently just taking his time here. He's probably still getting comfortable to the seat. In this turn in particular, he has to start thinking about Mind Control tech, because now he already has 3 minions on board, and he's considering playing another one. I think that at this point, he kind of shouldn't take too much attention to it, and he should just play it, because it's not that big of a deal to get Mind Control tech, I think.
Well, he's still playing around it. I think this is actually fantastic recognition from Surrender. He's still developing tempo, which is what you want to do versus Shaman. You want to keep the pressure up. You want to force them into awkward spots where they had to play stuff like Mind Control tech as just a 3/3. By shadow stepping this Ferrocat back to his hand, Surrender plays around pretty much everything that Casie really wants to do.
Yes, he does, but there's also always the point that if you think that eventually you'll have to play into Mind Control tech, maybe you should play into Mind Control tech when it's the weakest. And that turn, on turn 3 there, Casie had the Mind Control tech on curve, which I think was the reason Surrender decided to go for this play, because it was an on-curve play, and he would rather commit into it when it was less clean. But at the same time, I think that the minions on the board weren't that strong, so I think it was a good opportunity to play into the Mind Control tech personally.
No, I mean, from Surrender's mind, I think he realized if Casie Mind Control attacked the Candle Taker, that was actually pretty much lights out for him. So, yes, he doesn't develop the 1/2. He plays a little bit slower on the tempo, but I think it's just overall a safer line.
Yeah, so now Surrender is kind of in the same position as he was last turn. He has both 2 reborns on board, so it's pretty hard for him not to.
That's the second Candle Taker.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty unlikely, I would say.
The Candelabra is missing a lot right now.
Yeah. So from Surrender here, at this point, his board, his minions on the board isn't strong enough. So he kind of has to just develop more, and that's super scary because now Casie is really getting into territory where he can do very powerful plays with more mana now.
One thing to keep in mind is that the mind control tech gets a little bit weaker when you have 5 minions instead of 4. Like, when you develop as much tempo as possible into the turn that they want to mind control tech, you actually can still force them into awkward spots.
Yeah. And I think that Surrender did this pretty well there. But we see that the power of Mogu Flesh Shaper is really going to show off this turn with Casie being able to develop the mind control tech, and together with that, the Lackey and the Flesh Shaper.
Yep.
Which really puts Surrender almost behind, even though it was so ahead in the early game here.
Titanic Lackey, a new Lackey introduced in the Saviors of Uldum expansion. It says give a minion, friendly minion, +0, +2, and taunt.
Yeah, so Surrender here, even though he had a lot of minions in the beginning, we see that they didn't really do too much, and there wasn't too much pressure that Casie was under. And now Surrender's in the kind of awkward spot where he has a lot of reactive cards, but they're not very clean because he didn't get any of the burgle effects yet so far in the game.
Yeah, this is just a case of, I think, if he had drawn slightly better, where he'd gotten something like Henchclan Burglar, which lets you discover a spell from another class, or Blink Fox, which gives you a card from the other class. Both of those would have been really powerful here, I believe.
Yeah, specifically with Surrender's list, we see that he runs 2 Burglars, 2 Blink Fox, and 2 Swashburglars. So it's very likely for him to hit one of these and activate these Vendettas. So seeing the Vendettas being 4 mana now is quite devastating for Surrender.
Yeah, it is pretty upsetting. That being said, he still can fight for tempo here. He has not clean plays, but decent plays with stuff like Backstab and Candle Taker. It's not the best, but it's really not the worst. You know, if he had a commit to a Vendetta here, I think that would have been one of the worst case scenarios, and he can still play for tempo right now.
Yeah, and the second he picks up one of these Burgle cards, he will generate a lot of value, at the same time have a lot of tempo, which I think is what Surrender's plan is now. He just wants to keep himself on board and be ready for when he gets that draw.
That being said, I think Casie got out of this with his quest completion relatively unscathed. Usually as a rogue, you want to pressure the quest shaman as early as possible. And I don't think that really happened this game from Surrender's spot. Casie just had a lot of defensive tools in the form of Mind Control Tech and Mogu Flesh Shaper, even with the additional Titanic Lackey. So Casie's looking pretty favored from this spot. I think Surrender's going to have to pick up some nice draws here to actually get back in this game.
Yeah, you know that when the quest is complete from one of the quest decks, you're in deep trouble if you haven't gotten ahead up at that point. And Surrender, especially as an aggressive deck, isn't looking in a very good spot. But now with the Waggle picked up, he can potentially go for a more aggressive route and push for a lethal with Leroy.
Well, you have Waggle Pick with Leroy as just this devastating combo where Waggle Pick will return the Leroy to your hand. So you're looking at 8 damage from the Waggle Pick, plus 6 from the first Leroy, and 6 from the second Leroy. That's 20 damage. On board right now, he can deal 4. 4 plus 8 is 12. 12 plus 12 is 24. The Shaman's at 24 life.
Yes, and we know that Casie doesn't have any natural taunts in his deck. He has the Life Drinkers, but besides that, he doesn't have anything that is too good versus the Burn Plant.
Unfortunately, on board, that strategy doesn't work. Casie managed to get a Vicious Scrap Hound, which says whenever this minion deals damage, you gain armor equal to that damage dealt. So even from Surrender's side here, even though he doesn't know about the Life Drinker, he still can't really go for that all-in aggressive push with the Waggle Pick and Leroy Jenkins. He's going to have to fight off this 2-2 somehow, and that's going to delay him by another turn.
Yeah, it probably means that he has to take it slower and just play for more the future and potentially having the Waggle Pick game plan be something you can do a bit later on.
Makes a lot of sense. If the game plan doesn't work on board, you probably shouldn't go for it.
Yeah, but he still has his chance, I think. If he managed to pick up one of his value generator cards with the Burgle cards, I think he can still fight for board. Enough to get more time to get potentially additional burst also.
Makes a lot of sense.
So Casie are picking up more Faceless Lackeys. I don't think these are the Lackeys he wants to see at this point. I think he would rather have Spell Lackeys or Titanic Lackeys, just to make himself more safe. I think Casie at this point thinks that he's pretty safe in the game as long as he doesn't get burned down.
Yeah. There's a bunch of different lackeys that you can get. There's 6 currently in standard right now. Faceless Lackey summons a random 2-cost minion. Double the battle cry of that, you get 2. Oh!
2 Pyromancers.
That is actually not guaranteed. It does not summon 2 of the same random 2-drop. It summons 2 different ones. It just so happens to be the same one here.
Yeah, after the 2 Candle Takers from Surrender, we also see the 2 Wild Pyromancers from Casie,
well,
which is
one thing to keep in mind, I think that Casie may have just made a huge error here.
Oh, he just board locked himself.
Yeah. So one of the things about Shaman specifically is that they don't run that many spells. Meanwhile, he just picked up an Evolve off the top. But if they don't have plays, if their board is full, they can't really accomplish anything. They can't play any extra minions because their board is full.
And the board is
Casie-
still full, and he doesn't pick up a taunt. That means that Surrender gets the Leroy for the lethal.
I mean, this is just something from Casie where I'm
Yeah,
so...
I think this is a very huge error from Casie this game. And it's just an error you can't make here.
Well, it's something that's like so in the moment where you just forget about it, but man, is that punishing. Surrender figures out, yes, he has to delay a turn, has to set it up, and Casie doesn't hand him the win, but might as well.
Yeah, it was such a good position, right? He had board totally locked, he had full control. I think that the only way he loses there was if he got burned down, and he did the only thing he couldn't do there, which was filling his board and making him unable to play the life drinker for defense.
Yeah, Casie had a lot of ways of stabilizing through that. The hero power with the life drink will double the battle cry, give you 6 extra life, deal 6 damage to the opponent, but because of that board lock, he just didn't have that option.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what to say. I didn't quite see it in the moment because he went so fast, but I don't really think that that's a mistake you can do, and maybe the pressure is getting a bit to Casie here.
Well, if Hunter Ace didn't see it in the moment, Casie, you might as well not see it in the moment either. That's what happened.
Yeah, and I mean, that's always a thing, right? Because Casie plays so fast, right? So suddenly, if he just misses like a small detail, and that is a very small detail, like it's not something you really think about a lot. So you kind of have to go deep in the turn to realize that, oh, if I board lock myself here and he just doesn't clear any of my minions, how do I beat the Waggle Pick into Leroy?
Let's hope that stress doesn't get to Casie like it did that game. Let's go to a quick break before game 2.
BlizzCon 2019 is brought to you by T-Mobile. Their newest signal goes farther than ever, and it's built 5G ready. MSI, True Gaming. Intel, the official CPU partner of BlizzCon. And by HyperX, we're all gamers.
My name is Kevin Eberlein and my player name is Casie. I'm excited going to BlizzCon, not only because I'm going to play in the global finals, but also because I've been playing Blizzard games since like 12 years. Like this year I even wanted to go by myself to watch friends compete, but now since I qualified, yeah, I'm also going to play in the global finals. When I got into Hearthstone was early 2013. I always liked card games, so like I played all the card games in my childhood. And then I liked the Warcraft lore, but the only problem I had that I didn't really like just slamming cards on the field. I just wanted to see some minion interaction. I was like, wow, Hearthstone actually speaks right out of my heart, and I'm like, I want to play this game. Even when I started, I got really close qualifying for the World Championship, and now I have another shot at winning it all. This season has been tough. The pressure just got to me really early on. Then I lost every single week for like 5 weeks. I lost the game 1 in the week, and I was like, if I go 0-2, I am about to relegate. I look a lot at how the tendencies of every single player, how they pick decks and what they like. Knowing your opponent is really important. In my opinion, preparation, analyzing, and then seeing what you could play is more important than playing the game thousands of hours. Playing GM from home, I am more nervous than playing on a big stage. Like my problem is between rounds when I have no one to talk, I just talk to myself and I feel like, wow, what is this? What could happen? And then always think about the worst outcomes. If I'm here, if I lose between a round, I just make jokes with friends and then I'm like, okay, let's go next. Even if I would go 0-2 and lose, just being there is already a success for me. Traditionally, Europe has been the strongest region, and just making it into Europe GM and then now making it to global finals to represent them and hopefully get the win for Europe.
After a rough game 1, Surrender is up against Casie 1-0 with Leroy's Abound. I think Surrender managed to find himself a pretty interesting line of play at the very end. It relied a lot on his opponent to, what's the word for it?
Well, it allowed his opponent to go into a trap, which I think was what happened here. And Casie kind of fell into it there. And Surrender took his opportunity. And I think that from that point on, it was pretty low percentage that he will win. But he found the line that ended up winning. And I think that's very impressive.
I mean, that's something that you really have to think about at this point in the game. Surrender is someone with experience on the big stage. Maybe he knows how to play to people's weaknesses. Casie is often considered the fastest player in the European region, if not the world. Surrender realizes, hey, maybe I'm onto something here, where Casie will just forget that one little but very important detail that he's going to lock up his board with a doubled Faceless Lackey.
Yeah, and we see now that Casie has decided to swap up his deck and go into game 2 with Priest.
Yep.
And he's going to face off versus Surrender's own Shaman.
Yep, Casie on Combo Priest, and Surrender will be on Quest Shaman. So this matchup was traditionally considered very Priest-favored. You're actually the creator of the Buon Samdi Combo Priest, so I want your thoughts on the matchup after the Doom in the Tomb update, which introduced Desert Hare and Evolve into Quest Shaman.
Yeah, so now that we know that Evolve Shaman and Quest Shaman has gotten the additional resources of the Evolve and the Hare, it has changed the matchup quite a bit, because before, I think that the Priest was just very consistent on getting ahead, and Priest normally, when it gets ahead, is so strong and can utilize all of these very powerful resources to just lock out the game, and I don't think Quest Shaman really had a response to that. What is the case now, though, is that the Quest Shaman has gotten its own very, very powerful early game and potential for just blowing out the game, and I think that has made the matchup a lot more close.
If you had to put a number on it, what would you say Priest's win rate versus Shaman is right now?
Personally, I still think it's a bit favored, but I've heard a lot of mixed opinions, and I would probably put it around 55% right now. It's a very snowballing matchup, and I think that if Surrender manages to pick up some of the key cards like the Evolve and the Moga Flesh Shaper, he might be able to swing the board back.
Yeah. What are the key cards for Priest in this matchup? If you're on the play from Casey's perspective, what are the cards that you want to see?
So in general, you just want to get ahead early. Cards like Ahmed is super good for potentially turn 4, but the most important thing is just getting ahead. So you can utilize your cards like Inner Fire and just burn your opponent out before he can do the powerful stuff. Because when it comes to the end game, Surrender is normally the most powerful player, so we have to be able to finish the game before that.
I think Amit is generally recognized as one of the strongest cards versus Quest Shaman. Amit makes every minion that you play after it have health equal to Amit's health. So you can slap a Divine Spirit on High Priest Amit, get it to 14 health, and then every single minion afterwards is just this huge threat for the Quest Shaman to deal with, which a lot of times they just can't. So from Surrender's perspective, tools to deal with that, tools to fight early, that's really what he wants.
Yes, I believe that the only way they can really answer that is the mind control text, and that could potentially be a very big factor in the matchup when Casie has to decide whether or not he can afford to play around the 1-in-4 mind control text scenario, or he has to play around it, and it just depends a lot.
Makes a lot of sense, but we are not there yet. Surrender has a host of options here. He could go Evil Totem or Questing Explorer. Questing Explorer is generally considered just a very strong card. A 2-mana 2/3 that draws a card. Novice Engineer is a card that is widely played in Hearthstone right now. That's a 1/1. This is an extra +1/+2 in stats for Quest decks. I think it's one of the best reasons to play stuff like Quest Shaman, but against a board like a Light Warden and a Beaming Sidekick, maybe not as much.
Yeah, that's also a lot of the problem that appears a lot of time when you play versus the Priest, that playing your minions into the board isn't necessarily even good, because it makes them able to utilize their heal effects, which are super powerful, and gives them more resources or buff their minions.
Makes a lot of sense.
But Surrender here with a close call. He's wondering like what he wants to do here. He could potentially go for the Evil Totem and take it slow. Also not give Casie an obvious heal target.
So Evil Totem will give him 1 of 6 lackeys. Generally, I think the Ethereal Lackey, which lets you discover a spell, is considered the best one against combo priests. Often it'll give you stuff like Plague of Murlocs, which will transform all of these huge minions into random Murlocs. Or Earthshock, which silences a minion. Both of those are really powerful effects versus combo priests. He ends up getting a Titanic Lackey, which we have seen a lot of today, actually. Which is also pretty powerful, but not quite the best thing you can have
Yeah,
you're
it
trying to
also
fight
just
the board.
adds an additional option of the lackeys, which makes it even harder to play around the specific lackeys, right? Because there's so many different opportunities with the lackeys, and having a taunt option, I think, is very powerful on its own, and also very powerful as a threat.
Casie picks up one of the cards considered to be the best in Combo Priest right now, Northshire Cleric. One of the main draw engines of the deck. Northshire Cleric with stuff like Circle of Healing can just get you through to those combo cards, power out these impressive turns as early as turn 3, turn 4.
Yes, and I think that Casie did a very wise decision here with just taking it slower and not committing the Northshire Cleric yet. I think Acolyte of Pain is very smart to get out on turn 3 because it can get a bit clunky to get out in the later game, while I think that Cleric is just a solid card all around. And Casie just wants to spend his mana here and go clean into turn Ahmed.
From Surrender's perspective, I think he just picked up a huge draw, man. Look at this. He has Coin Mogu Flesh Shaper as a 3/4. He can kill the Acolyte on board because he has Rush, mutate the Mogu Flesh Shaper, get a random 8-drop. That is going to contest the board so incredibly effectively right now, because if Casie drops that Ahmed next turn, more often than not, the 8-drops are just going to contest it.
Yeah, it looks insanely strong. Not gonna lie, Galen. It depends a lot on the 8-drop.
And he has the follow-up.
Average 8-drop is definitely very good in this scenario.
The reason I really like it here is because it has really powerful follow-up with a Titanic Lackey into Weaponized Wasp. Weaponized Wasp says Battle Cry. If you control a Lackey, deal 3 damage to any target you want, which is just insane for a turn 4.
Yeah, it even contests the potential of Ahmed, right?
Oh, Surrender is going for an Evil Totem instead. I think he's just going to try to take it a little bit slower. Maybe try to get that Mogu Flesh Shaper down to 0 mana before committing to it.
Yeah, so Surrender here may be representing the threat of Mind Control tech to Casie. So I think what he thinks here is that Casie just won't play any more minions at this point because he is representing Mind Control tech in a bigger swing turn. But the fact is that he doesn't have the Mind Control tech. He's just saving his Mogu Flesh Shaper when he has more mana, can do an even more powerful play.
So what you're saying is that Surrender kind of just baited Casie here.
Yeah, that's the only reason I can find for doing such a play. And I think that it's very brilliant when it works out.
Well, look what just happened. Casie had the opportunity to play High Priest Ahmed and just didn't go for it. What is widely considered the best thing you can do on turn 4 versus Quest Shaman, and Casie just doesn't.
Yeah, it clearly worked out here because the clear obvious play was to play the Mogu Flesh Shaper because it was super good on board. But the fact that Surrender just passed and made it very obvious that he had a potential threat of Mind Control tech, even though he didn't have it in hand. Just forced Casie into not playing the Ahmed and just keeping the same board, making Surrender able to do the same play just even more powerful the next turn.
A Splintergraft here is more than enough. Just an 8-mana 8/8. That's huge.
Yeah, and Casie seems super devastated. It's so hard to come back after Shaman gets to do this powerful turn.
So I think from Casey's perspective, what he was hoping for was he could, on turn 5, go High Priest Ahmed and Northshire Cleric in the same turn. That's actually generally, that's just a powerful Hearthstone play to summon what's an Oasis Snapjaw and a 1/7 for 5 mana. But against what Surrender did with his staggered approach to tempo, it's not going to pan out for him.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I'm not even sure if I would have done that play myself, but when you see it like this, and he doesn't have the Mind Control tech, and you see that Casey's response is that he directly pays respect to the Mind Control tech. And that just pays off for Surrender. It's like
worked out
very
beautifully.
incredible.
It worked out absolutely beautifully. We see directly the consequences of what he did on Casey's mind.
Yeah. And Casie now in a super rough spot. He decided to play on the Mind Control check, which I even think is a very reasonable decision to make at that point, because Surrender did a very slow play, and it seemed super clear they would have the Mind Control tech. So Casie just took it slower, and now he's just super behind.
Casie still has a couple options here. Northshire Cleric can find another card if he needs to.
Or he can decide to go for that full tempo option with both the injured and the Ritualist already. But he decides that he wants to bank in on Northshire.
Drawing 2 makes a lot of sense here. You can get into something like Wild Pyromancer and Circle of Healing as a way to get back in this game. That would draw a lot of cards here if you picked up those exact 2 cards. Doesn't find it though.
I think this turn was also super interesting for Casie. Deciding to go for the Northshire Cleric there is quite a lot less board tension, but it picks up additional cards. I think in this case he got a bit punished for it because he picked up
this is
very expensive
so
cards.
Good for Surrender. Mind Control Tech and a second Mogu Flesh Shaper.
Yes. So a fun scenario you can pick up now is that if he's managed to steal the cleric, he could go for a healing totem later. Oh! And he hits the light ward.
Oh, I'm sorry, Casie. This was a rough game, man.
Yeah. I mean, that is just something that happens. 1 out of 3 times there, it steals the light ward. And I think that in this scenario, with the Moga Flesh Shaper and the entire board, to be honest, I don't think Casie would have won, even if it stole the worst possible target there. And I think this game I think Surrender managed to just find a line that just totally tricked Casie into doing a very slow play, and it just turned out perfectly for him.
Surrender really misrepresented his hand in here. Casie was thinking of like 5 different scenarios that Surrender just did not have. And it panned out beautifully. He got Casie to get off of High Priest Summon on turn 4, which is not something that's easy to do against a combo priest.
Yeah, I don't necessarily even think that it was a misplay by Casie to do that. I think that's just a natural reaction to what Surrender did. But it's just super impressive to like see Surrender go for such a play and get rewarded, and it's just a lot of credit to
Well, not only that, we're at BlizzCon right now. He's making these level of plays against the best in the world on the highest the highest games imaginable, man. The stakes here are so high. These are some of the most important.
And Casie just gives it up.
Games.
Surrender takes the win, and going to the winner's match.
Yeah, Surrender gets a 2-0, I think, in a very impressive series. I mean, we've been seeing this pretty much all day today. I think game 1 with PNC versus Lee was some impressive gameplay from both sides. Here, Surrender also showing a dominant performance. And if we have more games like that throughout the weekend, this is going to be a great tournament.
Yes, I'm very impressed by Surrender's play there. I think that both the games were super well played by him. And in the game 1, we saw that Casie had the little blunder there, which got super punished. I think that if he managed to not make that blunder, I think he would have ended up winning that game. And then we would have seen a final game 3. But since he managed to do that blunder and Surrender capitalized on it, Surrender takes the victory 2-0.
I mean, that's what we like to see. Misplays getting punished.
Yeah, and we would love to see great play from the winner, which we did.
Yeah, I think Surrender in both of those games had multiple opportunities to show how good he is at figuring out other people's gameplay.
Yeah, and now we see that Lee is facing Surrender in the winners finals, and I believe that they have mirror lineups, correct?
Possibly. And I mean, PNC and Casie, while they did lose their first game, are not out yet. They're going to be playing for their elimination spot, which will not guarantee them a spot in the top 4, but another chance to get there.
Yes, and it's really important to pick up this win in game 1, because the second you're on brink of elimination, the pressure really starts piling. And I think that Casie is probably very upset about getting this loss, and I really hope to see a better performance for him in the next game, because I really think Casie is a super great player, and he can play better than that for sure.
So you're someone that has a ton of experience just playing at this high level of competition. What would be the advice you'd give to someone like Casie who needs to shrug off that loss?
I think it's a lot about just resetting. Stuff like that just happens. Even when you play on ladder, it can just happen. It's just a small little detail that you just forgot. I don't think he did any wrong decisions when it comes to like the general stuff, but it's just a small slip up. Maybe that you should take a bit more time and just not think too much about it and just reset it and just act like it never happened, I think.
Yeah, you can't change the past. You got to focus on the future, and that's exactly what Casie needs to do. Let's take a quick break before game 3, which will be Lion versus Tom 60229.
Casie, I think this is a very huge error from Casie this Casie,
well,
which is just an error you
punishing. Surrender figures out, yes.
And the board is still full, and it doesn't pick up. I think this game I think Surrender managed to just find out.
So high. These are some of the most games like that
throughout the weekend. This is going to be a great tournament. Yes,
BlizzCon 2019 is brought to you by Coca-Cola, the official refreshment of BlizzCon. Facebook Gaming, a world of play. Samsung SSD, performance gamers trust. Corsair, do your thing. And by NVIDIA,